Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in this evening. Got a good guest on here tonight. He's a good friend of mine. He's a father, an author, a Bigfoot um, investigator, and he's also a veteran. So we're brother there on a couple of different fronts. John, thanks for coming on tonight.
Thank you, Larry. I'm glad to be here.
Well, if you don't mind, John, I find it interesting the place where you live. So why don't you just tell the folks a little bit about yourself, if you don't mind, and anything you want to go into. Where you live at is I think it would be of interest to those listening to the show, I guess. So I'll hand it to you there.
Okay. Well, I'm John Vandeventer. My wife and I moved to Honubby, Oklahoma, 3 years ago now, and it's our home, and we absolutely love it here. It's beautiful. Just kind of weird how we ended up here. I had I had gotten a friend of mine had talked me into writing a short story about Bigfoot. And before that, I had a passing interest. I wasn't really into it. If I saw something about it, I might look at it, think it was interesting. And he asked me to write a story about Bigfoot, so I did. And he had he probably still has. He had a production company, and they made those 30-minute infomercials. I don't see them as much anymore as I did back, a few years ago. But he wanted a short story that he could make like a short film out of. So he was talking about Bigfoot one night. We were playing an online flight sim, and we were all kind of distracted with him talking. And I ended up getting shot down by some German guys. So I bailed out of my P-40. It was a World War II sim, and I'm floating down my parachute and telling him, how stupid he is bringing up Bigfoot while we're supposed to be online fighter pilots. And pretty much what I thought of it as I'm floating down my cyber parachute. So the next day, I called him up and I apologized. And I said, okay, I really want to hear your Bigfoot story. And he told me a pretty interesting story about what happened to him as a child in Florida. And I was pretty shocked because I always assumed Bigfoot was a West Coast thing, Northwest United States. I didn't know about things in Florida. In fact, I was so ignorant of the whole thing, I didn't realize the legend of Boggy Creek was about Sasquatch. I remember seeing it as a kid, and I just assumed it was a some kind of monster or something. I had no idea it had anything to do with Sasquatch until I started researching to write this story for him. Well, as I got into the story, I'd put about 20 hours into it, and he calls me up one day, and we were actually he was gonna give me the locations, and I was just gonna he was gonna feed me those things, and I would just write the story. And we were gonna use Ohio, and once again, I was shocked that they had Bigfoot in Ohio, and so he called me one day and said, "I just got this huge contract in California. I'm gonna make a lot of money, and I really don't have time for the Bigfoot thing." And I was like, okay, because I never really enjoyed writing that much anyway. So I was like, okay, I'm out of this, and was pretty happy about the deal. And one weekend, my sister's in town from Arkansas, and I had the story printed out, and she was looking at that, and she said, "You should make this into a novel." I'm like, "Oh, no, 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 I don't need to do that." And she kept after me about it, and finally talked me into it. She was kind of my surrogate mother. I never knew my mother, and my sister was 9 years older than me. So, of course, I wanted to please Big Sis. So I thought I'd take a stab at it. And I lived in northeast Texas at the time, near Sulphur Springs. And so I started looking around for places in Texas that might have a Bigfoot sighting or some place I could use as a setting for the story to make it, more believable. And I never really found any place I was happy with. And then I ran across the Siege of Honubby story on Sasquatch Chronicles, and I thought, wow, I wonder where that is. And I looked it up, and sure enough, it's about 3 hours away, a little less, depending on traffic. And started looking at the terrain and stuff, and I thought, well, because I was just about to do the story in Falk, Arkansas, but I don't like swamps, I like hills, so Yeah, it made it that much more appealing to me. So I started getting a story together, and I was doing, just reading and finding everything I could on Sasquatch, Bigfoot, just anything I could find, because I wanted to make their behavior, and I wanted to make it a believable story. So I was looking into the behavior and things like that. And I started writing a story, and I was actually using Google Earth to look around. And I made this setting in Tallahena, Oklahoma, which is about 20 miles north of Honubby, because the story needed a police department and a hospital and things we just don't have here. So I chose that, and that's what I took off writing. I should have asked you, did you want to hear what his encounter was in Florida when he was a child?
Yeah, sure.
Would that be?
That'd be interesting.
Well, I thought it was really interesting. He was telling they had gone down to Florida from Ohio on vacation, him, his sister, and his parents. And I believe he said he was about 10. He wasn't a teenager yet. But they had one of those campers over on the back of a pickup, and had the overhang that hangs over the cab of the pickup. And so he said he was about 11 or 12 feet off the ground, and he was laying up in that part, and he was just kind of laying there. They were supposed to take a nap. His parents were taking a walk, and he said he was just looking at his feet, just rocking his feet back and forth, just staring at his feet, when all of a sudden this big hairy face looked in the window near his feet. And he jumped up and screamed, and his sister saw it, and she screamed, and they bailed out of the camper, and he thought it was his father pulling a trick on him. And, but it wasn't. His parents came running back down from a trail, to hear what all the commotion was about. And his dad looked around and stuff, and he said he was really mad at his father. He said he really thought it was his father. And his father's like, no, no. And his father himself, look, I can't get up to that window, and I don't have a monster mask or anything of the sort. So anyway, they ended up moving to another campground that night, I believe he said. So I just thought that was pretty interesting. And about the same time I heard that story and started researching for the book, the missing 411 stuff started coming out from David Paulides, and I just thought that was interesting too. So I tried to kind of mix the story in with a little bit of couple elements, there's a little from the Sasquatch stuff and a little David Paulides missing 411 stuff. And I just, the more I read and the more I looked into the phenomenon, I just got just overwhelmed with interest in it, and couldn't get enough. And like I was telling you earlier, I was using Google Earth to pick out my locations for things that happened in the book. And I was 8 months into writing the book before I ever came up here. And one weekend I decided, I need to go up there and look around and see if it actually looks like I'm describing it. And I got up here, and these, they're little mountains, but Kiamichi Mountains and winding stairs and all those around Tallahena. And I just fell in love with the place. And so I continued on writing the book. And one weekend, my first time out investigating Sasquatch, I'd made a couple of friends on one of the internet, or one of the bulletin boards about Sasquatch on the internet. And one of the guys was telling a story about how his brother and a friend had gotten run out of this camping area in Arkansas, and said something was screaming and yelling and throwing logs and rocks. And so they beat Pete, and they were thinking it was a bear. And they told this guy, and he said, no, bears don't throw rocks, and bears don't throw logs. So a bunch of us got together and decided that, well, let's go check this place out. So myself and my son Thomas, and he's in a wheelchair from wounds he received in Iraq, and my youngest son Trevor went with me, and we drove up to Long Pool Recreational Area. It's north of Russellville, Arkansas, about 20 miles or so. So the funny thing, we get there, and I've never met these guys face to face, so we're kind of introducing ourselves and stuff. And I told my youngest son, I said, if I was a Sasquatch, there's this beautiful creek there, and I pointed to a sandbar about, I don't know, maybe quarter mile away down the creek is a beautiful sandbar. And I said, I would go out on that sandbar at night. So it was pretty funny because one of the guys got in there, and we've become real good friends since. He's a retired Marine, and he lives in Pennsylvania. And he started telling us, well, something was stomping around here last night. And he said, funny thing, it was down there at the next campsite. There were some people down there with a tent, and he said they had a pickup. And he goes, I heard it walking around down there. And he goes, then I heard a commotion. He goes, middle of the night, those people threw their tent in the back of the truck and just boogied on out of the area. And it was funny because that first night there, we heard something stomping around. We never got a light or anything on it. And we had just gotten there, and everybody was kind of ill prepared. So really didn't think much about it. You know, I hadn't been in the woods in years, and I thought, well, you know, I might be hearing a raccoon or a armadillo or something messing around. You know, really don't know. And but it didn't start till everybody bedded down. And I think, you know I didn't want to be the person who was screaming, hey, there's a Bigfoot out there, and grab a flashlight and make a fool out of myself. So I just kind of, you know, slept in the truck. I didn't want to sleep in the tent. And made it through the night. And the funny thing, the next morning, my youngest son and I decided we were going to cross the creek. And my friend Joe, the retired Marine, I said, here, take a picture of us, would you? And we just stepped into the water, and, you know, I kind of had my arm around my son. And he took the picture, and as soon as he took the picture, I hear this loud wood pop from across the creek. And I'm just joking. And I turned around to Trevor, and I said, well, they know we're here. And so we started going across the creek. And, you know, I wasn't real sure if the wood knock is a valid thing indicating Bigfoot or not. You know, you don't know what's making noises, but it was hilarious because it was a pretty wide creek and the rocks are slippery. So, you know, we weren't making real big time getting across it. But I noticed when we got halfway across the creek, there was another knock. And as soon as Trevor put his foot on the opposite bank, there was a third knock. Now, I never heard another knock after that. And we got over there and found a game trail, and it was all pretty interesting. Well, we were about, I would say we had to be 50, 60 yards from the creek on the other side, and we found some cliffs, and we found like game trail. At one point it was like almost a hole. You had to kind of hunch down and go through because of the overbrush and underbrush. Well, we got to one area and it was just wide. It was like a big huge tunnel, you know, like the branches and stuff were just gone, like, you know, something big walked through there. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And then Trevor pointed out there was a pile of mussel shells from the creek there, and they'd all been broken open and laying there, and he's pointing that out, and I'm like, well, I don't know, I guess maybe people eat those things. He goes, well, they don't eat them raw. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, there's no fire here, there's no evidence of campfire. I thought, well, dang, man, you know, the college is paying off. So I said, well, good point. I said, but maybe raccoons or something. He goes, well, they'll eat them down at the water because they always like to wet their food down. I said, well, that's another good point. So I thought, well, you're on top of this. So we kept on exploring, and we got over to that sandbar I was telling you about. And we got over there, and he goes, look at this. And I think I've shown you the picture of that footprint we saw. And at first I said, well, that could be a bear print. And he goes, well, look, it's got a heel. Look at this curved heel. And I went, well, that could be something else walked on the bear print. I don't know about that. And there was just two really good ones in the mud. And he goes, well, did it step on, you know, identically the same on the print, this other animal? I said, well, I don't know. He walks on a little further, and we find the same print in loose sand now. It's not as well defined, but it was the same print. And it was the weirdest looking thing I'd ever seen. And I'm looking at it, I said, well, you might be onto something now because that is the exact same print. And then he found another print that was, we measured it out, it was 14 inches, and it was on a berm above that beach, you know, about 10 feet away. And it was more defined. I mean, it was a shallow print because it was on hard ground, but you could see the print. It came out good. And I said, man, I have to tell you, that looks like a baby was down there playing around in the water and a parent was standing on that berm watching. And so we kind of marked where everything was with sticks and wanted to the other guys had gone up on the mountains to look around. So it was just me and Trevor on the other side. And my son Thomas was in his wheelchair over by the camp. Now he was armed and, and good to go, but I was getting a little worried by then. I'm like, well, we don't know what's out here, and your brother's back over there in his wheelchair. We better boogie back over there. So we got back over there, and we were waiting for the guys to come down the hill. Well, finally, they came back, and then I swear it sounded like a David Paulides. I don't know if you ever read any of his stories, but he always talks about weather changes when people disappear. Well, it just started storming, man. I mean, the rain was blowing and wind was blowing and rain was it was terrible. I mean, we had to all get in our vehicles, and rode it out for a few hours. Well, we get out and the rain had gone away. Well, now we're hearing the noises again across the creek of something stomping around over there. So we're trying to get some night gear stuff together, and my son Thomas and my younger son Trevor, they had taken off. They said they were going into town to get something. Well, they're young men. What they were trying to go to Arkansas, to Little Rock, to some strip bar. And so anyway, this isn't funny, but they'd had too much to drink, and so they stopped and they're talking about, well, maybe we shouldn't go. And a cop pulls up and starts questioning Thomas, and he says, "You're not driving." And he tells the other one, "If you're fit to drive, I'll let you take over and you guys go home." Well, I guess Trevor wasn't fit to drive either, so we're trying to get the night vision gear and stuff out. And then I hear Thomas, whooping coming down the hill, and you see this one light. Well, they had to take a cab back to where we were, and Thomas had a night light on his head. So they're coming down the hill, and I'm like, "Where's the truck?" And well, it's in this little town about 50 miles away. And I'm pretty livid. I said, I got some expensive guns laying in your truck, and it's up there. And he told me what happened, so I wasn't real happy. And Joe and I went up there. He drove me over there, and we found the truck. And it was pretty funny because when they left, they said they were just going to the shower area and didn't think nothing about it, and they took off. So I get there, and this Arkansas policeman, he says, "Come here, I want to show you something." So I went over and he shines a light on the Purple Heart license plate on Tom's truck. He says, "That's the only reason I let him go." And he proceeds to chew me out. So by the time I got back to the camp, I was pretty dusted off with Thomas. I said, "Hey, did them cops chew you out?" He's like, "No." And I said, "Well, they gave me your butt chewing." So so anyway, it kind of ended the thing because we had to get back the next day, and it kind of spoiled things. But it was pretty funny. But then I was really hooked because I wanted to know, what was making the noises, what made those tracks. And but it also, I don't know, fueled my interest. I was able to get back to Texas and finish the story and get the book published. And then shortly after I got the book published, one of the scenes that's in the book a lot is Pam's Hateful Hussy Diner in Tallahena. So just before the book was published, I thought about, I better get a hold of her and ask her if it's okay to use the name of her restaurant. So I did that, and she was like, "Yeah, go ahead." People say that stuff all the time, but nobody's ever, "Yeah, go ahead." She didn't think I'd get the book written. So Monica and I drove up here, and I took her a copy of the book and thanked her, and we were coming back, and we were coming back through Honubby, and there's an overhang just north of town as you're going up the mountains to go toward Tallahena. Well, we pulled in there, and we're standing outside looking over this overhang, and this overlook, and it's about 4:30 in the afternoon, and we got the most massive vocal. It sounded like something from one of Ron Moorhead's I mean, that's what it sounded like. And we looked at each other, and I said, "Wouldn't it be cool to live here?" And she's like, "Yes, it would." And so the next day I go to work. Well, our company in Texas had just gotten the contract for all the Choctaw casinos taking care of their printers and copiers and fax machines. So, well, that's what I do. I'm a copier tech. So I overhear the president of the company talking about, "Hey, we're going to have to find somebody in Oklahoma and hire them and train them And he goes, this could take 2 years. And you guys are going to be driving, these 4 and 5 hour one-way trips to Oklahoma. And so I just piped up and said, hey, I'll move up there. He said, you will? I said, yeah, I know exactly where I want to go. So we came up the next weekend and started looking for a house. And, well, you've been here, and we lucked into this little house on this piece of property here in Honubby, and we couldn't be happier.
Yeah, it is a nice place. So, won't you yeah, go ahead and expand on that a little more about how y'all got a nice place there. Like you said, we've been there a few times. And by the way, folks, Chuck's not with us tonight. He had some family issues come up that he's tending to, so he's missed. But we're going to carry on anyway. And yeah, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about the area? I mean, because I love. I'm like you. I love the mountains. I love the woods, and that place. If I could move down there, I'd be your neighbor, but it's not possible for me. But
well, I'm hoping you two get up here one day. Well, the funny thing is, I think I'll start by saying how I met you and Chuck. I'd contacted Chuck. I heard forget which radio show it was or which podcast. I think it was the PTSD. Who had that? Was it Dogman Bigfoot PST or PTSD?
Yeah, that was Dustin from Missouri.
Yeah, Dustin. Yeah, I got to meet him too.
Yeah, yep.
But anyway, how I met you, and I'll just tell how I met you guys. I think it was first weekend of August 2018. And I'd heard all these stories about Brown Springs. In fact, Thomas and Trevor and I had gone up to Brown Springs one Saturday, but it was during the daytime. And I'd heard about how scary it was and stuff. And Chuck had mentioned you guys are going to be up there. So when I got off work that Friday, I threw some stuff in the car and I drove over to Brown Springs. And that's where I met you and Chuck. And the funniest thing was, it didn't feel like a creepy place to me, even in the dark. But I'll never forget that cackle we heard twice that night. And then we found that area looked like it had a den and something that was in it or had been in it. But I guess, and I'm going to tell on you a little bit, the funniest part of the weekend was to me was everybody's like, don't bring any guns, no guns allowed, blah, blah, blah. So we find this den, and who was it that found the hot spot in it?
Barry. Barry did.
Barry, yes. Barry Coy sees the hot spot on his thermal, and so everybody's kind of looking at it, and I just look over to my left a little bit with an AR-15. Where'd that come from?
Yeah, they mentioned to me, yeah, you probably don't want to bring any guns, and I'm like, yeah, no, I'm going to bring my gun.
That sailor's okay.
Yeah, there you go.
But the funny thing was, I came home from that, and didn't find any prints or any of that. But I remember when I got home the next morning, I told Monica, I said, the only place I've been where I've gotten creeped out is Long Pool, Arkansas. I said, Brown Springs supposed to be crazy scary from what I've heard, but I just never felt like it was scary, and I was comfortable the whole time I was there. And I told Monica, I said, and I'm comfortable here. I don't ever feel creeped out about this place. Even with all the legends and stuff at night, I'm completely comfortable walking down this dirt road if I want. So I tell Monica that, and then 24 hours later, I come outside of my house, and I came out to smoke. I got that habit. So I came out to smoke a cigarette, and I'm petting my dog, and I walked around behind Monica's car. And when I did, I was trying to get a look at Mars. Mars was real prominent that year, and I wanted to look at Mars. So I walked around the car, and I tripped the motion detector on her lights. So the light on the carport came on, and I was looking to the south, and there's a Choctaw church on the other side of our property to the south. And I guess what that light coming on and maybe seeing me caused this thing to move, because at first I just saw movement, and I looked, and as soon as I saw it, I knew what it was. I was like, oh my gosh, they're real. This thing covered, it had to be 80 yards. I had it in view, and it covered it in like 3 or 4 seconds. I've never seen anything move that fast. And the weird thing was, is it never pumped its arms. It looked like kind of like a cartoon character or something when it ran. And I saw it pump its arms once when it leaped out of my view, and I assumed it was leaping over a fence, because there is a fence on that part of the property, but it doesn't go down to where I saw this thing. The next morning, Monica and I went over and investigated, and what it had jumped across was a pile of old burnt lumber and rocks. There's a pile over there, and it jumped over that pile. That had to be what it leaped over, and there's a old Choctaw cemetery there, so it went through that cemetery. I didn't realize the cemetery was there either. We'd never walked over and looked, in that churchyard since we'd been here, and we'd only been here about 3 months at the time. So I run to the door, and Monica's coming to the door, and I'm like, Monica. She comes to the door, and I said, I just saw a Sasquatch. And she went, oh, John. So that was pretty hilarious. So then you guys are here, you and Chuck and Barry and Rick and Dustin had come by. He wasn't camping here, but you guys were all camping on the property here. And that was the Saturday night of the Bigfoot Festival. And so we're sitting out here, and I remember, I guess Chuck had gone to relieve himself around the shed or something. And then we heard this big vocalization, and I thought it was Chuck. And I said, man, he's got a set of lungs talking about Chuck. And he came around the corner, and he said, that's not me. And I could still hear the bell. And so everybody's looking where the noise came from. And it was in the same general direction where I had my sighting on the same property. And somehow I'd gotten sidetracked. I was looking at the light. You had put a recorder down there, and it was getting a reflection. So I'm looking at that. And then I thought I saw something standing in the churchyard, and I'm looking over there. But then Monica and Rick, and I'm not sure Barry saw it. It seemed like there was 3 people saw one just walk away into the trees on the other side of our property. So that was the two big things on our property. Now I've had another night where I could have sworn I saw something. We got a second carport out in the yard a bit by 2 sheds, and I remember one night I came out. It was that first Christmas we were here, and I had lights on the house, so there was a little more light than usual. And Monica was out by the fire pit talking to her daughter on the phone, and I just stepped out, and I looked over, and I could have sworn I saw this huge figure walk behind the carport on the other side of the barbed wire fence, so not on our, we're right there by the carport, maybe about 15 feet from it. And I remember telling Monica to go in the house, and I guess I said it with enough seriousness that she didn't question me. She just went in the house, and I went and got a 12 gauge and a flashlight, and I came out here, but I couldn't see anything. So that's been about the extent of stuff on our property. Now, I do have this thing that was going on for a while about 10 miles south of here on the other range there, the south range, because Honubby's in about a mile wide valley, and the mountains to the south, I go through those if I got to work, toward Texarkana, Broken Bow, and that. And mountains to the north, I go, like if I got to go to Pensacola or Poto or those places. But I remember I was coming back one evening from working in Nashville, Arkansas, and the car I was using at the time, it started getting a leak on the head gasket. So I had an oil stench coming in, so I checked the oil. The oil was good, but there was oil all over the top of the engine. So I pulled into a car wash and sprayed it off, hoping to knock out some of that smell. So I started coming on home, and I went through Broken Bow and Bethel, and I'm coming up the mountains, and it starts raining. So I turned on my windshield wipers. Well, I didn't know it. When I washed off the engine, I'd gotten oil on my windshield wipers. So I'm running the windshield wipers, and they're just rubbing oil all over the windshield, and I can't see a thing. So I slowed down to about 5 miles an hour, and I just keep hitting the windshield wash button, trying to get all that oil off. And finally, I get the oil off, and I'm barely moving. And when the last swipe goes, and I got a clear view, I see this big, huge reddish-brown leg standing by a pine tree, sticking out under a pine tree, and then it moves into the woods. So I drove up to that spot real quick, and I'm rolling down the windows, and I'm looking, but it's really dark in the woods, and I can't see a thing. And then I'm sitting there looking, and I'm thinking about the novel I just wrote, and you're going to get hit in the head with a rock. I went ahead and took off, and didn't think really all that much about it. I thought, well, who knows what you saw? And then a couple of weeks later, I have to drink a lot of coffee because I drive so much for my job to stay awake. Well, sometimes I just can't quite get to Honubby. And there's a kind of a cliff in that area where I'd seen that leg. And so one night I'm on the way home, and it's not dark yet, but it's getting there, and it's pouring rain again. This is the rainiest place I've ever lived in the United States. And so I go to the cliff, relieving myself, and I just happen to look down. That there's footprints right there where I'm standing, and I'm looking at it, and it's filling with water from the rain. And I thought, man, you need to remember where you live now and stay more awake. And so I never went back there for a while. I gave it a couple of months and started stopping there again. Well, I'm there again in the springtime now, and the leaves are coming out, and you can't really see too far. And I get the loudest. It was a human-like whistle, but I mean, it was just, the volume was just unbelievable. And it had to be, I'm thinking, man, that thing's within 50 feet of me, and I can't see it. And so I went and got in the car and left. And I didn't start using that place again until about a year later. And so I don't know what's going on over there, but I've had a friend I know tell me that sometimes the timber people say they have a hard time getting people to, after they harvest an area, they'll go back and plant trees. And he was saying sometimes they have a hard time getting guys to work on that part of the mountains over there because they see things or hear things or something spooks them and they just quit. So I've always thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that is. Chuck and I, we drove down that road you're talking about, going toward Broken Bow. We went down Broken Bow Lake down there when we were down last
Yeah,
time, and there's as you're driving down to Broken Bow, there's a game preserve really on both sides of the highway, and we drove
right.
way back up in there, and boy, there's activity all over that part of the country.
Yeah, there seems to be. And that area I'm talking about where I stopped. Well, since we moved here, a guy, I think he's got 4 cabins there now. He built a series of cabins right on that cliff. I think it's called Indian Overlook. I don't know if you saw those. They're pretty little cabins. They're spaced out a little bit. Well, that's right in that area. That's right in that area where I had those things happen. Funny thing too, I was coming back from work one day, and it was, I was getting home kind of early. It was about 4:30, and it was a beautiful, clear day. And right by those cabins, I see 3 bear cubs hauling toward the road. So I stopped, and 2 went by real, real fast, and one was a straggler. But by the time I got my phone up, got it on camera, and got it at the windshield, all 3 bears were gone. Couldn't see them. And I thought, well, that's why people don't get a picture of Sasquatch right there. I mean, I couldn't even get a picture of bear cubs.
Well, won't you well, let me ask you this: you didn't grow up believing in cryptids or thinking of cryptids or anything like that? What was?
No, I was I was interested when Legend of Boggy Creek came out. I think I was about 12 then. And that kind of interested me for a while and kind of spooked me and stuff. Actually, if I was into anything paranormal in those days, it would have been UFOs. I read a lot of UFO books and stuff. The old guys like John Keel and those guys from back in the old days, Frank Edwards. And a lot of those captured my imagination. But I've always been an airplane nut, so anything that flies kind of interests me. And I really didn't get that big. I mean, like I said, I had a passing interest. If I saw something about it, I might watch it or read it, think it was interesting. But it just wasn't something that really got into me until I started doing the research. I'm like, man, look at all these people. All these people can't be lying, and all these people, just can't make stuff up like that. I mean, nobody's getting rich, telling people. In fact, I'm kind of found out the hard way. You kind of, you just kind of become a joke, with most people. So why do that? But But no, I really got interested in it once I started researching. Funny thing too, I hear all these stories and stuff. I think back to we had a house on Lake Texoma we go to on the weekends, and one weekend my dad had some friends over and they were all drinking beer and playing poker, and I had a dirt bike, and their two of the kids that were there with their fathers had dirt bikes. So we, when they got all busy talking and playing poker, we liberated some beer and some cigars and, some other stuff. Decided we'd go camp out on this peninsula, and it was a good 4 or 5 miles away. It was out in the middle of nowhere. And so we're out there in the middle of the night, and I remember, and I didn't think nothing of it at the time, but rocks started getting thrown into the camp. So, so we're dumb kids. We don't know anything. We're throwing the rocks back, yelling and screaming, and really didn't think nothing of it. I thought, it was probably some other kids, maybe one of the local kids or something trying to scare the city boys or something. Funny thing too, though, in that area, I remember numerous times I go back there in my dirt bike, and I always felt like somebody was watching me. And, back then I never associated that with Bigfoot or anything like that. So, now looking back, I have to wonder, of course that was 50 years ago and, nearly. So, and it could just be all the stuff I've read. I'm trying to make a connection. I don't know, but it is kind of weird now that I look back on it. Another funny story I'll tell you about my brother. This is hilarious. He was 10 years older than me. He got a football scholarship to UTEP in El Paso back in the late 60s. I remember he'd been out there for a few months, and he came home and he brought a friend with him for Christmas. And this guy had this scar on his arm. And so, naturally my father, well, what happened to you? I can't remember the guy's name. And they tell us this story about how some of the, this is the 60s, so you couldn't get away with a lot in the dorms. So a lot of the guys on the football team, they got a bunch of beer and they went down on the Rio Grande and built a bonfire, and they were down there partying, having a good time. And they said this huge werewolf looking thing came out of the night and attacked him, and said, and this guy said it actually picked him up and thrown him, and that's how he got clawed. And my brother went on to say, yeah, he'd gotten under a truck, and the thing lifted up the back of the truck, and he rolled out. And I think he said it was like 15 to 20 of them down there, and everybody was just panicked and running off and jumping in the cars and leaving. And so he's telling this story, and he said, yeah, it was like, I don't know, it was like a werewolf or something. And my dad said, it was a beer wolf. and my brother, he passed away in 2000, but he stuck to that story his whole life. I'd ask him about it. And once again, after I started getting interested in Sasquatch, I thought about that, and I thought, well, man, that's desert. That's, there's nothing out there for them. But then I actually looked, and there have been sightings in the El Paso area out in the wilderness. So you just don't know. You just don't know. But
Well, we've got them. We've confirmed it that in eastern, or not eastern, but western Oklahoma, out where we live, it's not desert, it's grassland, but the rolling hills everywhere. But they're out here. You wouldn't think they would be, but they definitely are.
well, and like now, do you live close to where Barry lives? Are y'all anywhere in the same neck
Yes,
of the woods?
I live 20 minutes from where Barry lives.
Okay, well, see, now Barry's had stuff there, and I thought that was interesting too, because I'm looking at his photos. I'm like, man, it's like, the Great Plains. I expect to see buffalo, but but not big. But then again, that makes it even that much more interesting and more of a mystery.
Yeah,
So,
right. But I will say, in this part of the country, the rivers and the creeks and everywhere, the
yeah.
valleys, there's trees, there's cover everywhere, just not up on top of the hills. I had it described to me one time. It made a lot of sense. It was, if you can picture mountaintops that have trees on it, well, just reverse that. In this part of the
Oh,
country,
wow.
the mountains don't have
Yeah.
trees; the valleys do. So that's a way
Kind
to
of like
look at it.
Scotland.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, it's funny because I wanted to add this too. When in the novel, one of the main characters, female characters' name is Monica, and I have to let people know I didn't write about my Monica, my wife Monica. I didn't even meet her until I was about to send the book off to get published. And the funniest thing, when I met her, it was like bang! I just fell in love with her, you know. And so I'm trying to get a date with her, and she ain't gonna have nothing to do with me, you know. And she's been a widow and raised three small children been doing that for 12 years. So you know, she's naturally defensive and stuff. She's probably wondering who's this guy. so so finally, you know, after about 4 months, I finally get a date with her, and I'm gonna make it an afternoon date. You know, keep everything on the up and up. Didn't want to blow this, so I decided I'd take her to Texarkana because they have better restaurants in Sulphur Springs, and I'm trying to impress her, you know. So, and we're driving down I-30, and she's like, "So tell me about this book you wrote." I'm like, after 4 months of trying to get a date, I'm not going to tell you I wrote a Bigfoot novel. So she keeps pressing, finally, I was, you know, kind of mumbling, "Bigfoot, it's about Bigfoot." And she said, "What?" I said, "It's about Bigfoot, but it's not." I said, "It's fiction. It's a novel." And then, you know, and I knew she was a very spiritual person, and you know, active in her church, and even did a recovery program for people at the church on Wednesday nights, and just, you know, she's just always in the Bible. So I thought, man, I don't know how this is going to go. And funniest thing, she never bats an eye. She just looks at me and goes, "Oh, you know," she goes, "I thought if those things exist, they might be some form of Nephilim." And I'm like, "Some form of what?" She goes, "Nephilim. Haven't you read the Bible?" I'm like, "Well, no." At the time I hadn't. So, so I started looking into that, and my sister had also been on to me about, "Hey, this book is looking really good," because I'd send her what I wrote every week. She goes, "You need to make a sequel," and I didn't know how I was going to make a sequel. And so I took Monica's Nephilim reference and just added a few little lines late in the book where I could use that to make a story for the second book. So that's what I did. But yeah, people that meet us go, "So is that supposed to be Monica in the book?" I'm like, "No, that's somebody completely different." Now, she found a footprint with Chuck and me one time. We were over at, oh, well, I won't say his name. You know the cabin. I think you stayed there. And yeah, she found that print down there. Chuck and I had walked right past it, and I guess she came down the trail a little bit after and said, "Well, there's a print here." And sure enough, Chuck went and made a cast of it, and it started raining, but he did manage to get a cast out of it.
Right. Yes. Well, tell us what branch of the service you served in and what you did.
Well, I was in the United States Air Force, and first 14 years I was a crew chief on O2As, little prop planes, for about a year, and then I spent 3 years as an F-111 crew chief, and then after that I was 9 years as an A-10 crew chief, and really enjoyed being on the flight line because I loved aircraft. And then the last 2 years I was in, I was, you know the drill, NBC, nobody cares. Nuclear, biological, chemical warfare defense. So basically what I was doing was marching young airmen and young Lieutenant Butterbars to the gas chamber, and and that just wasn't very exciting. And that was during the downsizing when the Clintons were in office, and they started throwing money at us to get out. So at 16 years, I let them hit me with some money, and I got out. And there's times I've regretted it, and there's times I've, you know, said, no, it was a time to get out. I had 5 kids, and I was really hot for overseas 18-month deployment to North or South Korea, and not being able to take the family, you know. And when you got teenage boys and stuff, somebody needs to be home, you know. So
Yeah, well, that I never got married when I was in the military, mainly for that reason, because it's tough. That's a tough life.
well, yeah, it is. And I did something completely silly. I got married, then I joined you.
Well, why don't you tell us the name of your book, how people can find it, and the other one that you've written to go along with it. So.
Okay, the title of the book is Relics, and you can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Walmart.com, Target.com, or um, if you find me on Facebook, I can send you an autographed copy if you'd like. But yeah, Relics by John Vandeventer, and pretty easy to find online. And I'm just about to publish the sequel, and it's Relics 2, and it's the Honubi Remnant, and the setting for it is here in Honubi. And I'm bringing in some other stuff, some a little bit kind of the end times biblical stuff, with deception by the enemy, and like I've found so many interesting stories about, things like, you run across a lot of sightings where they see UFOs and they see Bigfoot and things like that, and just adding some of that in. And I've used a lot of information I've gotten from listening to people like Stephen Quayle and L.A. Marzulli, Tom Horn, and I've just taken. It's exactly what I did with the first book. I've just taken that information they give me and the possibilities, and I'm running around in my head until I can get a story out, and that's what I've done. Now, really, I would say 90% of the people that read my book really seem to like it. Really shocks me. Women like it as much as men, some even more, and I've had a couple of people um, that actually thought the story was nonfiction when they first started reading the book. In fact, we became friends with one couple that, and she was reading, "Do you remember an airplane crash out there near Mina back?" And he said, "Darling, that's a novel." and then I actually had a lady leave a review on Amazon about the book from Tallahena, and she kind of went off. She's like, "I hope everybody understands that this is all a lie. This didn't happen." And and so I kind of just replied to her, "Ma'am, it's a novel." So I figured you can get that good a reaction out of some people.
Sure, sure. Well, why don't you give the
Go
folks,
ahead.
just give them a little taste of the book, the first one, kind of give them an idea so they'll be
Okay,
interested in it.
to start the book, there's an F-16 pilot leaving he's in his jet, and he's leaving a air show at Tinker Air Force Base, and he's heading back to Shaw Air Force Base where he's at home station for his jet. And he has compressor problems, the engine won't relight, and he ends up having to punch out of the plane, kind of between Tallahena and Mena, Arkansas, in the mountains there near the Queen Wilhelmina resort there. And when he punches out, he rides it down as far as he can, tries to let the plane drop into this little canyon. So he punches out the last second, and as he comes to after being jolted by the seat, he sees figures running on the ground that are on fire and stuff, and he thinks it's people at first. So when he hits the ground, he jerks his helmet off. He tries to go render aid, and he gets about 20 steps and gets waylaid, and the last thing he sees is a big hairy face that kind of picks him up. And after that, how I wrote the story was for these juvenile Sasquatch. There's a huge forest fire, and they're kind of retreating from the fire, and they end up around Tallahena, Oklahoma. Well, and how the story establishes Tallahena, they kind of run afoul of some outlaw bikers at an overlook called Choctaw Vista north of Tallahena on 271. And the main character is Sam Redstone, half Choctaw. His father's full-blooded Choctaw. His mom was white, and he's a Iraq War veteran. And I actually, since it was the first time I ever wrote anything like this, I was trying to do everything I could to cut down on any research I had. So I actually put him in the Army. He retired from the Army, but he'd been in the 1st Cavalry Division and had 2 tours to Iraq. And so my 2 sons that went over to Iraq, one of them, the one that got wounded, was in 1st Cav. So I used first cab because I knew the deployment dates by heart. And as the story goes, when things first start happening, he's thinking it's more bikers or something trying to cause trouble. He's looking at how those bikers got killed, and he's thinking it's some kind of cartel mess or drug war or biker war. And his father, whose name is Addison, he's also a veteran in the book. Well, he's full blood Choctaw, and he starts telling him, no, this is something else, and he's trying to convince him. I hope I pronounce this right. The Choctaw people have a name for a very similar creature called Champé, and Shampe. And then there's another word they have for Ochlachita. And so I've used those names a lot in the book. But I go on, they never find the pilot, and they never find his body, and that kind of remains a mystery. And, you know, I ain't going to give too much away, but we're going to find out what happened to him in book 2. So, these four Sasquatches pretty much run amok for a couple of weeks in and around Tallahena, and Sam, the main character, figures it out a little bit too late what they are, but and I'll just leave it at that. But people really seem to like it. They like the action. They love the characters. A lot of people have, you know, gotten a hold of me, emailed me, said, "Hey, man, I finished this," and it's 534 pages, I believe. And I get people calling me, "Man, I did this in 2 or 3 nights." And, you know, most people say, "I read it within a week." And when's the next book coming out? So now, you know, it may not. I am not an expert on Sasquatch, so, you know, this is my interpretation, and I've just tried to use any knowledge I can get from researching, you know, actual encounters and stuff to base the behavior on, and, you know, and I've spooked it up a little. But the first book's mainly stayed in the kind of the Bigfoot's and you know, unknown ape or natural animal. Now the second book, man, we're going pretty deep off into the woo side, as they say. So I'm really looking forward to see the second book. You know, people like it as much as they did the first. I hope they do.
Yeah, sure. Well, that brings the question: what is your personal ideas, thoughts on these creatures, what their
Well,
origins and whatnot?
you know, I always thought when I first got into this, it's got to be an animal. It's just an unknown great ape. But the more I read, and the weird stuff, you know, that I read about, and I know people that have had some weird stuff like the disappearing tracks and stuff. I have to think there's more to it. And I'm not saying they're evil. I don't know that, but I think it may be more of a spiritual being. I don't, you know, and we're never going to know. What's that saying? What's his name? Wes from Sasquatch Chronicles. I don't have one I don't have one laid out on a slab in my garage where I can study it. So, you know, I don't know, but I think there's more to it than just straight up animal. But that's just me, and that doesn't mean I look down on anybody else's opinion, because none of us know nobody knows until they know. And funny thing too, I wanted to add this real quick. Since we've moved here to Honubby, the people here are just wonderful. We've made a lot of good friends. But there's people who've been here forever, and they think it's all a bunch of hooey. And then there are people here that say, "No, I've seen them," and, you know, have their own stories. So it just depends on who you talk to. But this one, I got to tell you, this one couple, they're real sweet. They're elderly, you know. This is me calling somebody else elderly, but they're about 15, 20 years older than me, so I can still call them elderly. But he's always trying to tell me when he was a young boy, he lived maybe a mile from here, up against, well, you know, the mountains behind the house, up against those mountains there. And his dad left the family, you know. He just, you know how that happens. He just left them, and you know, he had a pretty big family, and he was the eldest. And so his mom sent him out one night with a shotgun, and, you know, "We got to have some meat. Can you go see if you can get a deer?" Well, he says one of these things followed him up the mountain, Now, he said it had red eyes. He said he kept getting glints of red eyes on the thing. And he said it followed him up the mountain, and he kind of got up and circled back and got himself back down into the house. And he just said they didn't, it was, I guess it was close to winter time or something. It got dark early, and he said, we just went without dinner, anything to eat that night. And I guess he went and got a deer the next day. But every time he tells this story, his wife interrupts him, and she's like, "Oh, that's hooey. That didn't happen. I ain't know. I've lived here all my life, and I ain't never seen a Bigfoot." And she does this every time he tells the story. And sometimes I get upset because I want to hear the end of the story, and I've never gotten to it till the last time. So last time she let him finish, and then the funny part happened. She went on her thing. That's all hogwash. I've lived here all my life. And then she goes, "But you know what? We saw a flying saucer between here and Tallahassee one night." I was so tempted to go, there's people lived here all their life and never seen a flying saucer, but I didn't do it.
Well, we're coming up on an hour here. I don't know if you realize.
Well, it went fast.
But yeah, we'll go ahead and start wrapping it up here. But any final thoughts or anything? Give the folks any contact information you want to give them that might want to talk to you about the book.
Can find me on Facebook, John Vandeventer, VANDEVENTER. My email is johnvan52@yahoo.com. And if you're ever in Hanobi or coming through here, try and get a hold of me. I'd like to meet you. And if you're interested in the book, by all means, please buy it. I will tell you one thing. If you're going to buy it on Amazon, if you like the Kindle, get the Kindle because it's a lot cheaper. I hate how much the book costs, but, I didn't get the price on it. It seems pretty steep to me. But anyway, and also this year, October 1st and 2nd, I believe, is a Bigfoot Festival. We didn't have one last year. I got to speak at it a couple years ago, and it was really cool because I got to be up there with Ron Moorhead and, I can't think of the guy that does the films, that reviews the films off the top of my head. What is his name? It'll come to me after we hang up.
Yeah.
But that was kind of neat, but they asked me to MC it this year, so I don't know what that entails, but it's got to be easier than going up there and speaking. That scared me to death, man. But yeah, and like I said, the book's available on Amazon, Target.com, Walmart.com, Barnes & Noble, and it's called Relics, A Myth You Don't Believe, A Reality You Won't Survive. And the second book I hope to have out in the next month or two is Relics 2, Hanobi Remnant. And if you buy them, I hope you enjoy them, and I'll thank you right now. How's that?
That's good. Yeah, well, we do really appreciate you coming on here and telling us your stories. It's been a good time.
Well, I've enjoyed it, and like I say, I've really, I've been blessed since this happened. I made a lot of good friends, and I'm really happy I've got to meet you and Chuck and Barry and Rick. You guys are awesome. I always enjoy being around you guys.
Well, the feeling's mutual. We enjoy you and your wife. You all are just great people to be with. So.
Well, thank you. And I'm looking forward to seeing y'all again.
Yeah, we're going to get back down there eventually. We're planning on something. Well, actually, we're talking about coming down there during the conference this year. So.
Well, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. Like you said, last year nobody did anything, so.
Right.
Make up for it this year, but there's a few that might come down with us too. We don't know yet. We're still a month or two out, or a few months out on that, so we'll find out.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, we really appreciate you coming on. And for folks who might be interested in this book, yeah, you need to get it. You need to read it. It's awesome. It's a good read. You're not going to be able to put down until you get to the end of it. So, and then you might read it again. Who knows? But
well, thank you. And hey, thank you for having me on your show. I really appreciate it, brother. Really do.
No problem. Right. Thanks for coming on. Well, everybody have a good night. John, you have a good night, and stay safe.
Too, sir.
And we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you've experienced a cryptid animal in any way and want to tell your story, email us at cryptidsafari@gmail.com. You're welcome to come on to the show or just simply talk to someone who will listen. We're here for you. Remember to be kind to one another, seek the truth in love, and He will make you free. Until next time.